Hi, I'm James Perry from FJMT Studio. We're with the architects of UTS Central. This building is a 5-star Green Star and 5-star as-built Green Star building. So some of the key things that have contributed to this being a 5-star Green Star building, really a lot of it is through innovation. One of the key ones is a precinct sharing with Central Park that really contributed to a big part of it. Another aspect of the Green Star is that there's a plastic-free food court, and that was a real key objective for UTS. There's sustainability clauses that were actually part of the tenants' agreements that they had to actually take on when they moved into the building. The use of recycling water that we have shared with Central Park is another key contributing factor. The use of landscaping through the building is also similarly a key Green Star contributing factor. The building is a very high-performing building, and as part of that we developed some very innovative facade systems, active shading systems for the facade. There's double and triple glazed facade systems through the tower and through the podium. In the tower we use what's called a closed cavity facade system, which actually really allows you to manage the light and glare and performance within that space, which helps to contribute to the performance of those spaces, the performance of the air conditioning in those spaces. It's really a key part of the facade development. Similarly with the library and the reading room, we actually developed a really custom shading system for the library, which is actually adjust to the sun, the angles of the sun and the levels of brightness during the day. So with the tower, the facade tower that we developed it using a closed cavity facade system. So what that system actually is, it's a really high-performing, really innovative system. And the way that actually works is you have 3 layers of glass. The outer layer of glass is a very clear sheet of glass, which creates then a cavity behind that to then a double glazed unit behind that. So it creates a cavity, which is where we have positioned white aluminium blinds. That cavity is slightly pressurized, which means that you don't get dust accumulating in those cavities. But what it means is, it means a few things from a performance point of view. It helps to manage the glare and the light coming into that space, because those louver blinds actually adjust at different times of the day to manage the light and glare coming into the space. From a heat point of view, what it also does is it allows the heat from outside to come through the outer pane of glass, which has no performance on it. Any heat build-up in that cavity finds the easiest path out, which is through that same sheet of glass. So because there's a double glazed piece glass behind that cavity, that's where the performance surface is. So it controls the light, but it also controls the heat. So that double glazed unit prevents the heat, or majority of the heat, from coming into that space and pushes the heat back out through the single sheet of glass on the skin. One of the key factors that you experience when you come into UTS Central is the real focus on movement and health and movement through the building, which is also a contributor to the Green Star as well for the building. And in doing that, what we've done is really put a focus on the stairs and the escalators in the space. So we created an escalator street which allows people to move up and down the building without using the lifts, but as you can see behind me, a double helix stair, which allows more people to move up and down the building and really encourages people to move up and down the building. And that's really something that we focus through the building, is to try and enhance movement, enhance people going through the space, enhance people actually experiencing the space. So with these types of spaces, because of the scale of these spaces, really the purpose of them is that you can actually manage these spaces, and in fact that's across the whole building, where spaces become active with the lighting. They're motion censored spaces, so the lighting will turn off after a period of time, and then that enables the space to not actually use any of the power and lighting and so on that is active in the space when the space is being used. And that is something which is actually more broadly across the building and contributes to the Green Star aspect as well, where spaces are effectively, the lights are off, power's off, and then when they get into use it all basically kicks up, and that's part of actually being efficient with the use of power and power sharing across the job. The air conditioning is actually really interesting in this building, because what we had the opportunity to do was to tap into Central Park across the road. So we actually use their cooling, we use the cooling from over the road, so it means that the air conditioning in the plant in this building doesn't require cooling towers. So that was a really amazing opportunity, innovative sustainability opportunity, and a big contribution to the Green Star performance as well. And similarly, what that does is it allows us to basically manage the air conditioning in this building with the plant rooms that we have through the building, but tapping into Central Park. There are other features that we've applied to this building which we'll see at some point, which is how the air conditioning actually works, particularly in the tower. We've got winter garden spaces which provide relief air for the tower floors. And what that does is it enables us to keep the facade a very clean facade with not a lot of openings in the facade. So the relief air is actually brought out of those winter garden spaces. And it allows us to then also use the winter garden spaces as a sort of purge system at night, where you actually purge the building of hot air. And because those winter garden spaces are open, permanently open, they actually are very effective in doing that for the air conditioning. So the recycled water, as I say, is the irrigation is a big part of it, because we do have quite a lot of landscaping through the building, up on level 8, but also up on level 17. With the flushing that we have, we've again used, as I said, the use across from over the road, and that allows us to use recycled water through all the amenities that we have on, essentially through all the levels. And then we do tap into the UTS more recycled water plant that we have. So, but predominantly I think the main focus is actually tapping over from at Central Park. From a materials point of view internally, one of the key things that we looked at when we looked at predominantly the podium of the building, so that's going from essentially level 3 up to the start of the library. One of the key things you'll notice in the ceilings is that we've taken an approach to the ceilings where we've actually pulled back a lot of the ceilings on those podium levels and exposed a lot of the surfaces. So that does a few things. It actually helps to show people how the building is working. So there's a really keen interest on what are the surfaces, how do they work, what do they mean. People can actually generate some discussion about that in a university building. That's actually we thought really relevant. But the ceilings that you can actually see, which are actually also within these learning spaces, are recycled timber ceilings essentially. So what that allowed us to do is it allowed us to create a use of material that is really prominent in the space, but actually is used in a way which helps to reinforce both the intent of the services and the exposing of the services, but also help us to actually create the spaces within the podium. So there's really a dual impact of that. Because of their nature and their type, the use of this material, it actually also assists with the acoustic performance in the space. So given the building's proximity, particularly to Broadway, one of the things we were very mindful of, particularly again in the podium levels, is how the building performs at an acoustic level. The room we're in now is a highly performing acoustic space because of the nature of the space, but even in the more kind of movement spaces, the informal learning spaces, it was really important that we actually provide the right acoustic treatment in that space, because you have a combination of people learning, but also a combination of people talking, sharing, collaborating. And so the performance of those surfaces, those internal surfaces, was really important. There's certain limitations to getting the performance of or choosing the right material to give us the right level of performance, not only from a surface and an acoustic point of view, particularly when we're looking at spaces like this, but also just the performance of materials from a durability point of view from the university. We looked at, initially in the process, looked at recycled timber for some of the veneers and so on the wall surfaces, but one of the challenges there was just the ongoing durability for the university, and how some of the wall lining could actually take the use and the daily use from students, and getting the right selection of materials. So where we could, we tried to find and use recycled materials, or we tried to be quite innovative with materials, and then otherwise we really tried to make the material work really hard in the space, and able for it to be cleaned easily, able for it to be replaced easily. So that was a really strong contributing factor for predominantly the podium level, which is where there's a lot of movement, students coming in and out. The change of use, that was really the objective in those spaces. So the use of timber really, whilst we've actually tried to manage the use and introduce as much of the use of timber as we could, a lot of that was also not tempered, but it was considered about the durability of that and how that would fare in an environment which is the university. So being able to replace it, being able to manage it, being able to clean it, all those issues were part of where we very carefully put timber on the surface. One of the key spaces that we thought was really essential is in the terraces. So on level 8, both the north and the south terraces, there is a considerable amount of timber that we have used out in those spaces. And that really contributes to that feeling of that outdoor space. You know, instead of it being hard paved surfaces across both of those paved areas, both of those terrace areas, there is a considerable amount of timber which really does soften that space considerably. Well, these spaces are very unique in the university, and in fact quite globally. We look to try and find similar spaces like this across the world, and what we really found was that there were none really to reference. So we were really starting quite fresh for what the space could actually be. So I think what this space really, the objective of this space is to provide a learning platform that is very innovative of itself. And then within that process of generating a very innovative space, it's actually from a sustainability point of view, how do you use the right materials to actually give you that performance in the space. So within this space we really focused on recycled materials where we could, and the use of lighting, the use of the performance of this space are really how this space from a sustainability point of view performs really. I think from a learning point of view, the innovation in this space is actually how this space works as a 350 collaborative space. That is a very unique way of actually bringing that many people into a space and learning and sharing in an environment that is progressive from a learning perspective. I think the IT is it's UTS, so with that I think there was not an expectation, but certainly a drive and a focus to try and make the IT a key part of what the building actually does and delivers, and also to serve as part of the innovation of the building. And so in this space, in these collaborative spaces, you know, for this space to work as it does as a 350 seat collaborative space that isn't overscaled and disconnected, the IT plays a central part to it. So whilst the planning does certain things and has certain objectives to bring students and others in the space together and connected and to enable them to collaborate, the IT gives an almost a quiet backdrop, but a totally connected method for people being able to collaborate and being able to connect. So in this space you will see that there are numerous screens, numerous projectors, the ability to be able to connect at opposite ends of the room, but then similarly right next to tables next to each other. But it also allows, and what you can see is that there are a series of pods that sit through the space that allow students to, for instance, as an example, students could be collaborating, and then you could have one of the lecturers or a tutor come and ask that they share that information, and then the ability to go to any table in the space and literally put that information up onto the screens within the room, and then through via microphone and cameras actually be able to then talk about that information with the broader class. So I think the ability to be able to do that is really through the technology that we have put in these spaces, and they're you know, as far as you can go in these spaces, so they form a key part within these spaces. Similarly to that, the sound is really important in here. As I mentioned earlier, the acoustic treatment and the performance in these rooms is really central. So part of the sound and how the sound works in here is getting the right performance on the speakers so that you can communicate across the room. It doesn't appear to be too loud. It's getting that right balance. So the AV and the IT is really integral and central to this. And that was something we worked really closely with on UTS and the AV team within UTS to actually deliver these spaces. I think the other thing that was really interesting, when you have a space like this which is completely unique and never really been done or tested before, the process of AV and IT was a little bit iterative. So it was about almost planning for the kind of the extreme case, and then a little bit of trial and error to get the right balance and performance in the space, which is what that process was done through the AV team at UTS. So when we were siting this building in the city and on Broadway, we had the opportunity for a borrowed landscape, a shared view of what the context around this building is. And I think that the real objective for the design of this building and the shape of this building is about connecting to two geometries. One is the city and one is the campus. And in each instance, we really tried to maximize the opportunity of connecting to the context. So on the Broadway side, we had the incredible opportunity to share and borrow from Central Park. And so where we tried to plan the building and design the building was to maximize that. So even where the podium, so which we're in the collaborative space, the podium really strongly references that building. So even when you're in an enclosed classroom, you're able to look out the glazed wall at the back of the classroom and connect with that landscape. As you move between the different levels, the transparency and the connection with context and with place was really absolutely central to how we design and develop the podium. And part of that is then carried through, of course, onto Alumni Green, which is really the only green space that the campus actually has. And so with a building that has inherently a small footprint because it's a city campus, to try and maximize its connection to landscape or to green or to borrowed landscape was really central to the design intent. And so the terrace that we have on that southern side of the building that references Broadway and references Central Park it went through a bit of a process, because when we started with it, it was obviously a large area and it was essentially the roof of the podium, the roof of where the collaborative classrooms are. And it went through a real process of what's going to be the right use for the space, because you had the backdrop of Central Park, which is essentially an incredible green wall. We then actually thought the best way to activate this was to introduce the landscaping, and what was incredible is how quickly that landscape actually grew once we put it in, because we thought south side, is it really going to work? What's the space going to be like? You've got Broadway, you've got high traffic, and I think the success of that space is because of all those contributing factors, but yet somehow it's still actually quite serene and quite quiet. And again, you have that benefit of Central Park backdrop with the building stepping tower behind you, and then a really unique urban landscape in the city, essentially. So one of the key things when we're developing the design for this building is you're sitting in a campus surrounded by different typologies of buildings in UTS. The main one that we really focused on was the relationship to Building 1. This is a building which had to connect to Building 1. One of the very early design criteria for this building was actually connecting the floor levels to Building 1. So in this building, level 3, level 4, level 5 and level 6 all connect and match the floor levels of Building 1. So working through that design criteria, it enabled us to make that a real focus for how the building relates to Building 1, just from a circulation point of view, from a connection point of view, and then also internally from a visual point of view. What we then looked at doing was actually orientating the circulation in the building so that it related to the connections that we have with Building 1. So what you will see on level 4 is when you walk from Building 1 to Building 2, the double helix stair is right on axis with that main connection with Building 1. And then what we try to do is really make that the focus of how the circulation works around the building. So the building relates to Building 1, which is really important in other ways, which I'll also go through, but also more broadly in the campus, actually putting the circulation on the perimeter of the building enabled people and encouraged people in the building to actually move through the building without using the lifts. And again, that was a really strong design criteria that the university set through experiencing Building 1 and how people use the lift there rather than actually the escalators. So the opportunity to put escalators and stairs and other things to the perimeter meant that not only are people looking outwards, looking out to the campus, looking out to the city when they are walking up and down, but also people walking around the building actually see that activity and see people moving up and down the building. The other part of it is, I think, a really strong and important connection was connecting Broadway to Alumni Green. That connection had never been there as part of the campus, and it had always kept Alumni Green almost separate from the activity and what was going on in Broadway and in the city, essentially. And so it was really important that we provided a really strong visual and physical connection. So the circulation through the podium became really important. You walk in off Jones Street, you walk into a really open, very high space that is very strongly visually connected to the footpath into Central Park beyond, but you can turn your head and look down between the building or through the building to Alumni Green. So that immediate and direct connection to the campus from Broadway. And similarly, if you're walking down Broadway on the footpath, you can actually look through the building and connect to Alumni Green. With the food court, we had a similar intent. We almost wanted to make this idea of a kind of food street in a way, so that you can, the awareness of public, but students, but public as well, to be able to see that there's activity there and life and food court there actually encourages people to come in and ask what it is and how that space is actually used. And currently what you can see in that level, the entry level along Broadway, is an exhibition in that space, which is what that was always intended to be, which is a way for the university to actually connect back out to the public. And given the incredible location of the site, that is a remarkable opportunity to connect back to the city. When we look at the relationship of the Building 1 and Building 2, the towers, we always thought that Building 1 was obviously very kind of robust, strong form. And so the design intent from the very beginning was to almost create a very ephemeral and a very soft form as a counterpoint to Building 1. So whilst Building 1 is a very rigid, strong, sharp, heavy building, we wanted to actually do the opposite. And so we created a white building, a very white building, and that was assisted through how we developed the facades. But there are no corners, the edges are curved, the building rotates away from Building 1. So there's a real play and a juxtaposition with Building 1, and that was really the relationship that we tried to create, so that they, almost like a brother and a sister, they talk to each other. It was really important. So here we are in one of the winter gardens for the tower at UTS Central. These are a really interesting integration into the tower, and they are north-facing winter gardens. They go from level 9, but level 10 is where the stair starts, and it goes all the way up to level 16. So the intent around these winter gardens is that we wanted to create a space which allows the users of the building to actually go outside and to take advantage of the north-facing aspect of the building. These spaces are naturally ventilated. They're constantly naturally ventilated. They've got fixed open louvers on the facade. And what that does is it allows the space to actually be part of the outside. It also allows us to actually, from a mechanical and an operational point of view of the building, to actually tap into this from a relief air perspective from the air conditioning, and actually allows us to night purge the building. Now what that actually means is it takes the hot air that's built up over the day in the internal spaces and actually purge out to the space and then go out the open louvers. So this space is really a key part of the tower, and it was a way of actually breaking up the scale of the floor plates as well for the tower, but also, apart from just providing that outdoor relief for users of the floor and the different levels, actually integrating landscape as well. So what you can see in the space is landscape that actually ties the objective of connecting Alumni Green up to the terrace, which is where the level 8 terrace is, and then as you continue up the winter gardens, the landscaping is continued up and quite visible, and then all the way up to level 17. So there's that real connection, that visible connection of the landscape tying through the spaces. One of the key factors that you can see in these spaces is a spiral staircase. Now, this spiral staircase starts at level 10 and connects you all the way up to level 16. It doesn't actually stop. And what that spiral staircase does is a couple of things. One of the things is it actually creates the anchor point and the center point for the rotation of the winter gardens. So what you can see from the plans of the winter gardens is you move up and down the winter gardens, they get progressively smaller as they go up the building. And part of that is because the floor plates get progressively smaller as the building rotates up to the very top floor. And the spiral staircase is really that anchor point that connects all of the winter garden spaces together. So students and staff are able to move up and down freely from all the way from level 16 actually all the way down to level 10. The other part of the winter garden spaces is we actually introduced a timber ceiling in these spaces, which is quite unique through the building as an actual surface and a material for the ceiling. And part of that was to reinforce it as more of an outdoor space. And so when you look at the building, you look up at the timber ceiling. So it was really about connecting to not only the landscape and the winter garden externally, but you are also looking at the warmth of the timber ceiling, almost as a slight contrast to the very white facade tower of the tower that you see. And then when you're within that space, again, that timber ceiling just provides a bit more warmth. It provides a sense of that connection to the outside. It's part of the kind of biodiversity of the terraces and the opportunities for the landscaping in the building. It's really interesting, the library have taken the initiative to actually try and introduce another element to the biodiversity, and so they've actually introduced a beehive on level 8 North Terrace. I think it's really interesting because it just gives that opportunity to think about green spaces differently within the campus. I think the other thing on level 8, we also introduced a water feature up there, which was about just bringing another level of interest and just difference to what those terraces actually are. And I think it's a bit of a focus when you walk out there. There is moving water in as part of that fountain, part of that water feature. So that was really important just because that's almost part of the change, part of how you can use that space. Similarly up there, actually on level 8, there are also solar powered benches which add to I suppose the way that those spaces can be used. So it's encouraging people to go out there and look at those spaces, be part of those spaces, then understand how those spaces have been designed, the type of species, plant species that have been used as well.